Thanks, Kathy. And welcome everybody to our District 5960 Friday feature, which I believe is the 12th edition of these Friday features. I hope you've felt they've been enjoyable up to this point. And I know today will be no different. If you don't know, my name is Kyle Haugen. I'm our District Rotary Foundation team leader. And today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite programs and Rotary's signature program, Polio Plus. Eradicating polio is very important at any time, but in the current state of the world, the importance of disease prevention is even more significant. We have two people joining us today to talk about Rotary's polio eradication efforts. Charlie Cogan is a Northfield Rotarian and has been the longtime team leader of our Polio Plus team. Also joining us is Dick Huston from the Faribault Rotary Club. Dick is a past president of that club and has a great firsthand story about being on the front lines of the fight to eradicate polio in Pakistan. I'm going to turn it over to Charlie first to give a brief update on Polio Plus, especially in our new COVID-impacted world. Charlie will then introduce Dick for his presentation. At the end, we'll take some questions, so please enter any that you have in the chat box along the way, and I'll go ahead and moderate that Q&A at the end. Before I turn it over to Charlie, I do want to just recognize a couple other people that are on the call today. Number one is our the incoming Polio Plus team co-leader, Joe Stallman from the North St. Paul Maplewood Oakdale Club, who will be teaming up with Charlie next year. We also have District Governor-elect for another 11 days, Ed Merrick, and also for another 11 days, District Governor nominee Kenny Closter and District Governor nominee designate Dale Quigley, who are all getting promoted on July 1st. So with that, I'd ask again, as Kathy did, to ask to make sure you are muted. And please help me welcome Charlie Cogan, our district's Polio Plus team leader. Charlie.
Thank you, and thanks for saving me some of the introductions. I've been doing a lot of these international Zoom meetings, and I know that Richard, who's fresh back from Pakistan, knows that the longest part of most of those meetings is introducing all the important people at the meeting with all of their titles and glorious achievements. So I'm going to keep that short, except to say that Marshall Cook is on the call as well, and we have a district Polio Plus team. And Marshall's a retired physician who came recently into the district and has done quite a few programs. And one of the things that our Polio Plus team is glad to do is to come to your clubs, wherever they may be, and present, give you updates on the campaign, and inform your members so that they don't feel like they're just giving because you're supposed to give, but that they're supporting something that they understand. And that's been one of the most fun things of being on that team. Looking at the people who are on the call right now, in a way, it's a little bit like preaching to the choir. So I'm going to keep my part fairly brief and just say that in 1988, when Rotary launched the Global Polio Eradication Initiative with the World Health Organization, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, UNICEF, Rotary, and got things started, there were 350,000 cases of polio in the world. And if you know anything about polio, it's a little bit like COVID-19 in the sense that for one case that you actually see the person get sick and can diagnose it and say, here's a person who has polio, you may have as many as 200 people carrying the virus who might get a mild flu-like symptoms. They might feel a little bit badly and then feel better later. And so it's really, when you think of 350,000 cases in the world, times 200, it's pretty incredible what we were facing when we started in 1988. In 2020, right now, there are 62 cases in the world in only 2 countries. So in 1988, there were 125 countries that were polio endemic, had never gotten rid of polio. And Kyle has a wonderful PowerPoint that we've done that can be done for another program, and then we can actually bring from club to club and show that has maps showing an almost entirely red map in 1988 with polio cases around the world to now down to 2, because Africa has been now polio free for 3 full years of the wild polio virus. And the wild polio virus means the one that circulates and that is actually the original polio virus. There are some vaccine induced cases scattered around the world those are usually fairly quickly addressed. Once we locate them, we go in and do a mop-up campaign, and the vaccine is actually being produced right now to work on that, because that's going to be sort of the last cleanup on the campaign. Dick is going to have some updates from the front lines about where we're at with Pakistan and Afghanistan. You can't really do Pakistan without Afghanistan and vice versa, because the borders between the two countries are pretty fluid. The amazing thing is that India has managed to stay polio free for all these years after they managed to achieve the goal, bordering on both, I mean, bordering directly on Pakistan and Pakistan bordering on Afghanistan. It's a tough neighborhood, but even northern India has managed to maintain this, and it's only through really strong efforts. And that's why one of the most important things is that we have two countries in the world that are polio endemic. But about 10 years ago, Tajikistan, which is sort of bordering on Afghanistan, said, hey, we've been polio free for 10 years. Why should we be doing so much work? So they stopped the vaccinations in the Tamir Mountains, which border on Afghanistan. Within about 6 months, they had 500 cases. So that's why you have to keep on vaccinating until you get all of the polio virus out of there. There are some mega worldwide issues that we can always talk about. But I also wanted to say within our district, we've had a good, strong district. We're one of the leading districts in our zone, and our zone is one of the strongest in the world in its support for Polio Plus. This year, our goal is $120,000 from our 65 clubs, and Rotaract sometimes helps as well. It's great. We've still got 19 clubs. We made a round of phone calls last week, and 3 clubs have called and said, yeah, they're sending the checks this week. There's still 19 clubs that haven't given this year, and I think part of that is the disconnect because of COVID-19. We haven't seen each other, and sometimes you get on the meeting, it's about the meeting, it's not about all the business of the clubs. So we've made those calls. There are some clubs that don't have phone numbers for any of the leadership teams at all. This is something I've never seen before. So where I couldn't get the president's number, I would call the vice president, the treasurer, and a lot of them have called back. But we still have 19 clubs that haven't yet given. 7 of them have goals. And I know we've had a variety of different communications from the district to make sure that clubs know that they're doing this. Some clubs just do this late in the year. But this year, I think Holger Nack on his call a couple of days ago told us that this is the first year that Rotary isn't quite meeting its $50 million pledge. And the idea is that we put in our $50 million and then the Gates Foundation matches it 2-to-1. We're at about 42 million right now. We might be a little higher now because that was a couple of days ago. Our club is about 15,000 from meeting the goal. So I think we're going to get there, but we do need to, all of you, if you could go back and ask your clubs, have we done our Polio Plus pledge this year? I have a list, but I'm not going to read it out here. But we have a list of the clubs that haven't yet. But go back to your clubs and just say, hey, are we on track with this? And if not, there's still time to get this done. And all of us can help you to get things in on time. So this is an important cause, and it's something that all of us I know believe in. Richard's had an unusual experience. We have people in our district who've been to Africa, to South Asia, to all kinds of parts of the world to do polio vaccination work. India was good for a long time because people's security could be guaranteed. And so during this push, when we had the final inch, there's a wonderful documentary on India's fight to get polio free. Thousands of Rotarians went, and it's an incredible thing. It's an incredible experience. And I know that Kyle and Richard and others in the group have had that experience. Pakistan and Afghanistan and northern Nigeria are areas where Rotary hasn't encouraged us to go as Rotarians, because there's a danger that you make the vaccination teams a target. You make them a high value target if you bring in international Rotarians in a somewhat hostile environment, which is why Dick's experience is pretty special, because he went by himself. And that can be done. The Rotarians can manage it. I'm sure they don't publicize it until you're there. And that way you were able to get out and see things that most Rotarians haven't seen. And I think that's why I'm really looking forward to hearing this presentation, because thousands and thousands of Rotarians have been around the world as we've been working on this, getting from 125 countries to 2. But Dick is one of the only people who's actually been to Afghanistan in the last, I would say, 10 years to actually bring some news from the front lines. And with that, I'll pass it off to Dick. And Kyle, his tech master.
All right. Thanks, Charlie, and thanks, Kyle. Kyle, if you want to put the PowerPoint up, I'd appreciate that. And I ended up going to Pakistan as a result of, actually started out as part of my wife and I, of a cultural exchange to southern Germany. And from there, we went up to Hanover to the international meeting last year. And I went to a breakout session on foundations. And Aziz Menon, who had been referred to previously, is the polio person for the whole country of Pakistan. And he was part of that breakout session. So I visited with him afterwards and talked to him about the possibility of coming to Pakistan. And he really, really wanted me to do that. He gave me a copy of his presentation, and after I got home, I was thinking about it, and I sent him a note, and he in turn got the wheels in motion, made sure I had the proper visa, sent me a letter of invitation, and so in November of 2019, I went to Pakistan. Next. Pakistan is the 30th largest country in the world, but it's the 6th largest population. They have 225 million people in that country. So it's a very, very crowded place. They got their independence in 47 from the UK, and they had a constitution in place by 73. And they mandated at that time that 20% of that constitution, that people serving that constitution, were going to be women. In the country, 73% of the men are literate and 52%. And the discrepancy comes because in the northern part of the country, in the highlands and in the mountains, women don't have the opportunity to go to school. They have 2 official languages, Urdu and English, and they begin requiring English in their school system in 2007. 96% of the country is Islam. Next slide. As Charlie said, there are several partners in this. The one that he didn't mention that is part of this at the beginning was the Vaccine Alliance. And then he also mentioned that the Gates Foundation is now as part of it. They came on board in 2007 with $100 million, and now they have contributed upwards of $1 billion. Rotary has given in excess of $1.5 billion since this endeavor started. Next slide. The virus was discovered in 1908, and some of you may be old enough to remember that in 1946, the Minnesota State Fair was shut down because of the polio going on. There was a vaccine discovered, the Salk vaccine, in 55. And the last case of polio in the United States was in 79. And the last case in the Western Hemisphere was in 1994. So since we have begun this, there's been over 20 million volunteers serving in 200 countries, a total of $17 billion invested, and over 2.5 billion kids have been immunized around the world. Next slide. This is the Kyle slide that Charlie was talking about. I want to take a break here and just say that Kyle was really, really helpful in helping me put this PowerPoint together. And so some of the stuff I've got here came directly from him. And Charlie also has been very instrumental in helping me get the word out. Next slide. And these are the 2 countries that have polio today and in an endemic thing. And as Charlie said, in August 2019, Nigeria became free. And you become free, declared free, when you've not had an active case of polio in the last 3 years. Right now, there are 72 countries that are still being monitored, and 20 of those are considered at very high risk. Pakistan and Afghanistan are unique in that they have to deal with the Taliban for one thing. There's a huge amount of propaganda going on, warning mothers that if they vaccinate their kids, they're going to have really bad results. That goes on through social media. There's a great amount of migration that goes back and forth across the two borders. The area is hard to deal with just from the mountains and that type of thing. And so those border issues, and then, you know, they're getting tired. They've worked so hard, so long. And to keep people enthused to do this is just a monumentous job. And they're working really hard at it. And as we go through the slides, you'll see the efforts that they're making in doing that. Next slide. So this is my host family. I stayed with this family for the 8 days that I was there. And they're really, really great folks. We had a good time. The two gentlemen on the far side are their sons. They're out of college. They're in the real estate development business. The daughter, the second from the right, is in college at this time, and then my host. It was pretty interesting. From the time I left Minneapolis, or got into the Minneapolis airport, to the time I got to Karachi, it was 31 hours. So it's kind of a long trip. So I get to Karachi at 3 o'clock in the morning, or I'm sorry, at 2 o'clock in the morning. And this is a town of 25 million people. And normally when you go to something like this and they're expecting you, there's somebody holding up a sign with your name. Well, that didn't happen. And so I go out on the plaza and still didn't see it. There were 3 young men there that were very, very helpful. And so they got a hold of my host parents, and they'd had a problem with their car, and they showed up about a half hour later. And we ended up getting to bed about 3:30. We were up by 8, and we were busy the entire week. They had planned a jam-packed full week for me for the entire time that I was there. The city of Karachi, which is 25 million people, has 60% of the city with no infrastructure. That means 60% of the people live in an area that had no paved roads, no water supply, no sewer system. There's some very, very difficult areas in that town. One thing that was very, very evident is that families are extremely important. These 5 people all live in the same house and will for some time. And the one on the left has since got married since I was there. And they have love marriages, and they have arranged marriages. And there's no pressure on the young people to do either one. But in either case, the parents, and primarily the mother, approves of the daughter-in-law coming in. And so she was in the process of approving her future daughter-in-law when I was there. There's no smoking in the entire country, and there's no alcohol served anywhere, which is very different from any other place I've ever been in the world. The homicide rate in Pakistan is 1/13 of that of Chicago or Washington, D.C. So people talk about my safety. I was never felt any kind of fear or discomfort while I was there. Next slide. As Charlie said, Americans going to Pakistan just doesn't happen. I had no idea that was true when I made arrangements to go on this trip. And so when I got there, I was welcomed like I've never been welcomed before. These folks showed so much gratitude that I came to their country to learn about what they're doing to eliminate polio in the world. I went to 4 meetings, which was a accumulation of 8 clubs. And at each meeting, I was a guest of honor. And when you walk into a meeting and you see the sign up in the upper left-hand picture, it kind of takes your breath away. And at each meeting, I was a featured speaker. All the meetings were done in English. And at each meeting, I received a gift. The hat that I'm wearing is a topic hat called a topic. And what I have around my neck is called an arak. Both of those are given as gifts of high esteem and are very, very special. Next slide. I was made an honorary member of a newly formed club. I was at the first meeting of this club. It was a club that was formed by the wife of the house that I lived in. And again, I was just blown away that they would do this kind of thing for me. The hospitality and the kindness of the people in Pakistan was just overwhelming. Next slide. So Aziz Beman, who was the head of the program in Pakistan, in their group decided that they had to do 4 things in order to get rid of polio. They had to prevent disease, which we all know about, which is the immunizations. But they had to improve general health care. They had to clean up the water system, and they had to create jobs for people. Next slide. So the focus, of course, is on immunization. And the immunization at this time is 2 drops of a modified live vaccine on the tongue. One of the problems with this is that the virus can mutate and cause the disease. It has done to some degree. It's not nearly as severe, but it can cause paralysis. And so what they're doing now in Pakistan is they're training nurses to give an injectable vaccine. It's a killed vaccine. They're focusing on ages of 5 to 13. And I was able to go to 5 different sites where they vaccinated children. And each one was very, very unique. Some were just on the street at the upper left-hand corner. Some were in little offices, 10, 12 square feet with just a desk and a health worker and parents bringing their children in, on trains, on buses, and in hospitals. Next slide. They create jobs they pay the young men that have the vests on and the small boxes of coolers, and those coolers have vaccine in them. So that's one way that they create jobs. And these young men will then earn enough money that they can go out and be entrepreneurs in their own business or make a better life for their families. And the buses, the government works well with, has worked well with the people of Pakistan and with the Rotarians. And so they have a stop coming into Karachi, about 3 or 4 miles north of the city on the main highway. And the government mandates that every bus coming in from the north, and there's a lot of migration going on, has to stop. When that bus stops, these young men get on and vaccinate all the children under 5. They're there 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and they vaccinate upwards of 3,000 kids a day. It's amazing. And there is some reluctance, of course, both on the trains and on the buses, of mothers who aren't so sure. But I've watched these young men reassure the mothers, and they just go from looking like they're frightened to just their eyes just soften as these young men talk to them. So they've been trained exceptionally well to handle those situations. And the same thing happens on the trains, as the people on the right show you. We went through the train cars, and then they put a purple marker on the little finger of the left hand to identify which kids have been vaccinated. And that gets to be a really huge problem, is keeping track of kids being vaccinated. Next slide. So one of the things that they're doing to improve healthcare is, as I mentioned before, is that they're training nurses to give the injections. This is going to be more difficult. It's a lot easier to convince somebody that their child should have 2 drops on the tongue than it is going to be to give them an injection in the arm or in the leg. But these nurses are volunteering their time. There was about 70 or 80 of them in there, men and women. And they're taking training on how to go about and get this done. It was pretty impressive. I was asked to speak to them a little bit too, and they were just so attentive and so gracious. It was awesome just being in that group. In the upper right-hand side is a hospital setting, and obviously that's the best. When they bring children in to be vaccinated in a hospital, the doctors or the healthcare workers, again, will provide other vaccines. They'll give wellness exams to the mothers and to the babies, and they have a record. They know what's going on. And so they try to emphasize that, but it's been difficult to get parents to bring their children into the hospital for vaccination. And on the bottom, they have little clinic type of thing where a healthcare worker will be in a room and they can bring in children or adults and treat minor incidences of disease or injury. A little girl standing up had an injury to her hand, so she came in, and the healthcare worker will take care of that injury on her hand. Next slide. So clean water is a huge issue. Rotarians in Pakistan and Karachi have constructed 11 water purification plants. They're filtration plants. And this helps stop the spread. And again, it provides jobs. And there's a huge amount of pride that goes along with this. The two men in that picture help build it, maintain it, and supervise it. People can come there once a day and get 2 gallons of water for drinking. And that's the only potable water that they have access to. The rest of their water is the same water that they use to bathe or cook or just not clean. And so that's a big problem as far as spreading the virus, because water is a main vector of moving it from person to person. So Rotary has constructed 17 of these and are in the process of doing more. The picture on the left is a city dump. It's about a block long, about 20 or 30 feet deep, and about a half a block wide. And I watched truck after truck come in and dump garbage in there. And then a caterpillar came and spread that garbage out. And as they did, cows, men, dogs, and goats all rummaged through it to find food for that particular day. I'm a large animal veterinarian, and I've never seen cows eat a dump before. It's one of the saddest things that I've seen. Very, very difficult. And as you can see, that dump is very near some relatively good buildings and about a block away from a brand new shopping center. So there's a huge disparity from the rich to the poor. But the rich help the poor there. They don't have the government programs that we have. Their attitude is closer to what it was when I grew up, that families help families, and those that had help those that have not, and not depend on the government like we tend to do these days. Next slide. So we've all seen this picture, and we are this close, and we need to continue to work at it to get closer and closer. We can't give up, as Charlie said. The people in Pakistan are working so hard. They know what their role is in eliminating this disease from the world, and they're determined to fulfill that role. We need to help them. We just do. It's just so important that we continue to support this program. What Rotary has done is just amazing. Next slide. So I want to thank you, but I also would like to make a request to give this program to other clubs, Rotary clubs, wherever. But in addition to that, I would like to give this program to other groups. I'm going to give it to a different service club in Faribault. I've given it to a church group. I'm going to give it to AAUW. I'm going to give it to sixth graders in our public school when and if we get back to in school. Because not only do I think that we need to tell other Rotarians about what's going on with Polio Plus, I think we need to tell other people. I think it's just so important that the world knows what Rotary has done and is continuing to do, and that they have a feeling for what the good that's been going on and how important it is that we continue it. So thank you.
Thanks, Dick, and thanks for telling that story and for your activities there. Again, we'll take some questions for a few minutes here, and I have one, but if anybody else has any, go ahead and send them in the chat box. Natalie Ginter asked, our population of immigrants and refugees is growing in this country, and there's fear among them that vaccinations aren't safe. And certainly parents of all races, ethnicities are choosing not to vaccinate their kids for reasons such as the belief that immunizations can cause autism, so on and so forth. So is there a risk of polio happening again in this country? And Charlie, why don't you go first, and then Dick, you can follow up as well there.
In 2004, a group of Rotarians from our district went to West Africa for polio vaccinations. When we came back soon afterwards, there was actually a case of polio in Minnesota. I think it was in 2005, and it was in an Amish community that wasn't vaccinating. And someone came from another country that was still polio endemic at the time and was working in the community, and actually there were cases of polio. So there are pockets, even within the United States, where vaccination levels aren't good, and there's some danger. I mean, the coverage is still better than it is, for example, for measles, where the measles coverage dropped enough that you had the outbreak at Disneyland and all kinds of other things. But yeah, until there's no more polio in the world, there's always the danger that polio could come back.
Anything to add there?
Yeah, I think I agree with Charlie. There's always danger. And as a large animal veterinarian, food production veterinarian, I know the value of vaccine. And if we did not have those vaccines and did not use them on a continuous basis, our food supply in the United States would look very, very different. And so, but we have the same problems here and across the world that they have there. And that's propaganda that is telling mothers, especially mothers who are the most caring for their children, don't vaccinate, you're gonna harm your kids. And so that's going to be an ongoing issue, I think. I don't see that going away.
Marshall from Lakeville asked, did you see any evidence of crawlers and or post-polio syndrome sufferers in Pakistan when you were there?
Yeah, there was some, not very much. I mean, I probably saw maybe 2 or 3 people that had polio and showed the problems with walking that you see sometimes with that. But it wasn't really evident, though.
And I can speak to that a little bit. In January of 2019, I went to India, and we saw it a lot more frequently. Just driving down the road, you saw people that had clearly been polio sufferers. And certainly when we went to places like the Taj Mahal or a couple other more famous tourist places, there were always a lot of beggars, and 1 or 2 of them were always, that term crawlers there. And it was for our group to look and say, hey, this is why we're here, to make sure nobody else has to feel like that in the future. Our Governor-elect Ed, my understanding is the Red Cross is partnering with Rotary to deliver vaccinations for measles. When you were giving vaccinations in Pakistan, did you see any evidence of that, Dick?
I did not, no. And they didn't talk about that. The focus was entirely on polio. That's every conversation we had was what had to do with polio. We didn't talk about other diseases. Now, as I communicate with them, they're having the same issue with the COVID virus that we're having, and so it's altered a lot of the work that they're doing at the moment.
Charlie, do you want to talk a little bit about Polio Plus as a whole and the
Right.
other things that it does?
Right. Well, I was going to say, I recently wrote an article for MinPost about the role of the WHO, the World Health Organization. And in 2004, when our group went to West Africa, we did work with Red Cross for measles. And one of the best things about that is that we had measles with Red Cross, we had polio and vitamin A with Rotary. We had a group called Rotarians Against Malaria that gave bed nets. We had another organization giving us anti-parasiting medicines. And then, so what ended up happening is the WHO coordinated that. And it was more complicated because at that point in time, polio was being given generally as an oral vaccine, but measles is still an injectable vaccine. So you have to have a lot more nurses and trained vaccinators on the ground to do so for this particular campaign, it was an integrated campaign. We didn't do the usual house-to-house delivery of the vaccines that we do from house to house orally, because anybody can give 2 shots out of a Visine bottle into a kid's mouth. What we had to do is bring people into the health centers, and then they could get all 5 treatments at once. And that's something that is being pushed more and more. UNICEF has recently come out in the Rotarian magazine about 3 or 4 months ago. The director of UNICEF said that in Pakistan and Afghanistan, they're going to begin doing multiple things at once because that gives families the incentive to come in. And they're also trying to combine, like in Pakistan, the vaccination campaigns with health centers that provide broader care. And then at the same time, clean water, sanitation, putting in sanitation units, things like that. So it costs a lot of money and it takes a lot of effort to get multiple organizations to work together. But the benefit is that you don't send a vehicle out 3 times to do the same work. So I think it's something that's becoming a trend as we move forward. And in 2004, there were all kinds of problems. At one point, the local Rotarians felt that Red Cross was putting in more money, so they got to meet with the minister. And the WHO representative sat us down and said, what's our goal here? Is it to get vaccines into the mouths of children and to get people safe? Or is it to get more credit? And people calmed down and focused on getting the job done, and it was a big success. But I think that the WHO plays an important role for getting different groups to work together. Dick was right to mention that the Gates Foundation jumped in, in 2007, 2008, and started matching everything given by Rotarians 2 to 1, and that's been huge in allowing us to keep motivating our own Rotary clubs. But also, it's just triple our impact. The Gavi Vaccination Alliance is actually really powerful too. When I first joined Rotary, I was trying to push for hepatitis B vaccine because my brother-in-law died of complications of hepatitis B and malaria in 1997. I thought that I was going to be able to make a 3H grant for hepatitis B vaccinations in Togo in about 2008 or 2009. And I was told that the Gavi Alliance was actually doing this kind of a pentavalent, 5 different vaccines in the 62 poorest countries in the world. When I got in touch with the Polio Plus director in Togo, he went to the Ministry of Health and they said, yeah, but we're having a hard time with our cold chain. It's begun to wear out over all these years of Rotary using the cold chain for Polio Plus. So we went back to Polio Plus and they said, no, we've got enough funds now with this boost from the Gates Foundation and everything else that's going on that we can actually renew the cold chains. So Rotary has kept on renewing those cold chains over the years. And about 1 year later, every child in Togo who came to the vaccination sites got the hepatitis B vaccine along with 4 other vaccines. So I think that's Polio Plus. That's where our renewing the cold chain meant that other organizations could come in and do the work they need to do. And it's really, really a huge multiplier effect. Sorry, I get excited when I go on. Yeah.
Dick, Ashok Patel from Rochester asked, what insights from your polio journey could be useful for our frontline teams caring for COVID short of a vaccine, talking about how Rotary can reach homes, populations at the margins, including refugees. Do you have any insight on that or that you saw?
I think one thing that really impressed me was their flexibility. They didn't have a set pattern of, we got to do it this way every single time. You know, they vaccinated children everywhere, and they adapted to what they were doing to the needs. And so, you know, vaccinating children on the street, on the buses, on the trains, and their flexibility in approaching the disease and the vaccination issue, I think, was huge. Rather than say, we're going to do this for everybody, and we're going to do that for, we're going to do it this way for everybody. I think that we can learn from their approach that way.
Thanks. Joe Stallman asked, what is the plan for future Rotary trips like these, and how has COVID affected these plans? And first off, I'd actually written a note here of encouragement for everybody that I was going to use in closing. But if you've never participated in a National Immunization Day anywhere, I'd strongly urge you to consider it. It's a great experience to see for yourself what Dick saw, and it'll change your life to a certain degree. Obviously, I think a lot of travel right now is on hold, but I know there are several different organizations, either Rotary organizations or affiliated with Rotary, that coordinate trips to India, Africa, to do immunization trips. And certainly I get information on some of those, and anyone that has been on a trip probably gets information. We can pass that along as well. So I'd suggest reach out to Kathy or I if you are interested or in going on a trip. That'll change your life. And I'm not sure what the how everything stands right now. A lot of those trips are typically put together in the late fall, early winter, kind of November through February timeframe, and so they're not quite out yet. But there'll be more information coming there, I think. And Dick can probably introduce you to some people in Pakistan if you want to do a one-off there as well. So, Dick or Charlie, anything to add on that other than encouraging people to go?
No, I can certainly put people in contact with the folks that helped me and made the arrangements for me to get there. They're very willing to talk to almost anybody, I think, that has some interest in learning what they're doing and to further their efforts.
About 5 years ago, I ran into a Rotarian in New Hampshire who had also been to Pakistan. I think it can be a very powerful experience. It's worth mentioning that Rotary International doesn't organize these. There are Rotarians who organize them, but it's not Rotary International. So for example, Brad Howard, who has been a Rotary trustee, has a travel agency in California, and he was organizing a lot of the ones to India. And there are other parts of the world that are still vaccinating. So Rotary International is cautious about Pakistan and Afghanistan, but if an individual Rotarian makes the connections, they're not going to say you can't do it. They're just going to say, don't take a big group. So I think it's, but people to people stuff is important. When we've taken groups in the past, the number of kids you vaccinate is minuscule, but the impact of the people on the ground knowing that the world is in favor and supporting, and then the insights you can bring back to where you're from to tell the clubs in your district, hey, this is real and this is powerful, and share it just like Dick is doing is huge. And I think, for example, this year within our district, I think moving forward, the more we can do this for clubs, the more they understand and feel part of the effort.
I know that I can communicate back to Pakistan and tell them what I've done, who I've spoken to, that type of thing. I sent them the article that Charlie wrote for the Zone newsletter. They in turn put that in their own newsletter for the entire country of Pakistan. And so, Charlie, they really appreciated the work that you did on that. That was huge. And so I couldn't believe how much gratitude they had for my coming there. That an American came and spent the time and the effort to learn what they were doing and then be willing to give it back. one thing that I did is that our church has a children's offering every morning. That's called a jar. Every Sunday, it's a jar offering, and each month they put that into a special project. I asked them if they'd do it for polio for Pakistan. Kids in our church raise, I don't know, upwards of $800, and so I added to that a little bit and got a certificate of appreciation and put that money to polio in name of Pakistan. And they were just so grateful to have that happen. And so it really worked out well for Rotary and for Pakistan. Our church became aware of the important work that Rotary has done. And the kids all got a better understanding of what's going on in the world. So we need to tell our story, folks. We need to let people know what we're doing, not just other Rotarians, but other people.
Well said, Dick, and I think we'll end it there. Thanks, Dick, for sharing your story today, and Charlie, thanks for your information as well. To everybody else, thank you for taking some time out of your day to join us as well. And before we close, we do have some more opportunities for you to learn about the great things that Rotary and the Rotary Foundation helps us do in the near future, and some ways to have some fun too. This afternoon at 2 o'clock, we'll be having our 2020-21 grant proposal presentations, and all are welcome to come learn about the great things that our clubs are going to be doing with district grants. And then you'll be getting an email probably later today. Might be in your inbox right now. I'm not sure exactly when it'll come out, but next week we will be conducting interviews for 2 Peace Fellowship candidates. Rotary Foundation has a Peace Fellow program, and we have 2 candidates that are going to be interviewed Monday morning at 9 a.m. and Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. More details will be in that email. Next Friday, our Friday feature will be on undoing aging. And the description that I'll read here, 10,000 people turn 65 every day in America. And the greatest biomedical challenge we are facing since old age is the greatest risk factor for most chronic diseases. And bold and new approaches are needed. And Dr. Laura Niederhofer and Dr. Paul Robbins will be joining us to talk about their program at the University of Minnesota that is taking the lead on developing therapeutics for to treat aging. So those are some of the impactful things. Some fun things we're doing. Next Tuesday afternoon at 5 o'clock, we'll be having a virtual happy hour to celebrate our 2019-20 District Award winners. We'll unveil those results and have some brief interviews with some of the clubs to learn what they've accomplished that were successful. And then we can't forget Tuesday, June 30th at 7 o'clock in the evening, District Governor Ed Merrick's installation. All of those events, the details can be found on our website, district5960.org, under the district calendar, and we hope to see you there. And with that, thanks again for Dick and Charlie for all that you do in helping eradicate polio from the world. And thank you all for being here today. Have a good weekend.